Telltale Books. I'm Greg.
And I'm Emily.
And we're here to talk about a very controversial book which relates to the February overall theme, Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. This is one we've kind of been putting off. I've been trying to get her to read it.
Yeah,
but also
I ended up I didn't finish this one because there's a lot of triggery stuff in it for me. Yeah. But it is an important work, and so we wanted to make sure we still did a video about it. You've read it already before. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so.
Which is a message you're going to hear from a lot of people. That there's tons of triggers in here, that it's cringeworthy, creepy, it's a horrible book, all kinds of bad things about it. But we'll get into that after I give the basic idea of this. Okay, so right off the bat, this is going to trigger a lot of people.
Right off the bat.
It's about a pedophile.
Yeah, it is about a pedophile, openly.
And it is told from the point of view of the pedophile. I always get his name wrong. Hubert Humbert?
I think it's Humbert.
Humbert.
Yeah,
really
he has a redundant, stupid name because this is supposed to be a comedy.
Yeah, it is a comedy.
It is.
But most people don't get it.
No.
They don't get the joke
very
because
deeply.
It is. I mean, this is as black comedy as you can get.
Yeah, it's pretty dark for comedy. It is cringy.
Yeah, so Humbert, when he was a teenager, he had a fixation on this girl that was younger than him. Mm-hmm. And so as he grows up, that's what he's kind of fixated on. Mm-hmm. Is 12-year-old
reliving
girls.
His first love, so to speak, which was a 12-year-old.
Yeah. So he comes across this woman who is divorced or widowed. I forget.
I think she's widowed.
And she has a daughter, about 12 years old. And so he has a thing for the daughter. He hooks up with the mother and marries her.
Yeah.
Ultimately, knocks her off so that he can have the daughter to himself.
Yep.
And he basically forces the daughter to marry him and then have relations with him.
Just like Woody Allen.
Oh. And, it just goes downhill from there. Eventually, she does separate from him, and he's crushed by it. But that doesn't do the book justice because, like I say, this book is total satire. It is dark comedy. It is written as a comedy. You're seeing things from the bad guy's point of view, and you're seeing it as if it's all okay and all funny and.
Yes and no. I'll disagree with that because he also is mourning the fact that he is this way in a lot of respects. He's still falling prey to it, but he knows he shouldn't. And so, it's not really from a perspective of okay. It's more of from the perspective of, I don't know how to change it, and it's just going to eat at me until I just pursue it.
Other books that would cover this kind of subject would paint the pedophile to be a total monster. Something out of Stephen King.
Yeah, no, he does mourn
Nabokov
and feel bad.
Humanizes this guy.
Yeah.
Which none of us want to see.
No.
But
not even a little.
Here's the fact of it. Pedophiles are human beings.
Yeah, they're people.
And they're screwed up, but they do have, everybody sees themselves as the hero of their story. So they don't see that they're monsters or doing anything wrong.
And he's very humorously, narcissistic about himself. He's like, yeah, I'm hot. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm good looking. Oh man, this mom is tripping all over me kind of stuff. Yeah. And
so the whole story is just sick and twisted. But it's also, unfortunately, very, I don't want to say realistic, but there are people like this.
Yeah. Yeah.
The details of the story don't happen in reality because the story is over the top. But there are
they might happen in reality, but we're not pedophiles, so we don't know.
There are pedophiles in reality, and there are murderers in reality, I think Nabokov approached this book from the point of view that we can't just stick our heads in the sand and not deal with this. We're never going to move forward. We're never going to be able to understand it if we don't face the fact of it.
Yes,
and
I agree with that.
So he not only wrote about it, he wrote about it from the point of view of the pedophile, and he wrote about it in a way that doesn't turn it into a horror story.
One of the things I think is interesting, too, is right at the beginning is the lack of... It's very obvious that there's a lack of resources for this guy to even get help. Like, nobody wants you to be a pedophile, but to even say that you have feelings for a child could throw you in jail.
Well, this was... I think it was 1951.
Yeah, it was early. Yeah, but there still isn't. Like, even if you had a psychologist, the psychologist is obligated to tell the state if you've done something or have issues with something like that. No, not back then. But I'm saying, like, there weren't the resources. Now, even if there are the resources, there's still things you have to skirt around. So there's so much red tape to getting help in the first place that who's to say if that would even help?
Yeah.
You know? So, like, one of the things that I recognize right away is that, like, he's falling prey to this because there are no resources. There is no release for him. I actually thought it was really funny at one point where he's like, ooh, there's a little girl over there changing her clothes. And it ended up being an old man and he almost died. He's like, oh gosh! I've been watching this silhouette through the window for minutes thinking it was a little girl. It's just a really scraggly old man. That was pretty funny, actually.
Yeah, but stuff like that is just pointing out how the mind can become like that.
Yes, how warped it can happen very quickly.
And that it can happen to real people.
Yeah.
So, brilliant novel for the fact that it forces us into this horrible situation, but does not turn it into a horror story, and instead turns it into black comedy. And you know, for me reading it, I couldn't help but see the humor of the whole thing.
It's absurd humor, for sure. It's absolutely absurd humor. I kind of felt the same way with, like, what was it, 120 Days of Sodom? It's so over the top and so absurd. I could get through that, but for some reason, this one really hit me. I think it's just my headspace with the season being, like, seasonal depressive and stuff like that. Yeah, so I would like to try it again. Also,
this one is absurdity, but about real world things.
Yeah, it is.
You know, the story is fiction and over the top, but the kinds of events that happen do happen.
Yeah, it's real life. That's for sure.
It is real life.
I would like to attempt, at least at some point, to try and reread it for myself, but I just don't think I had the headspace to finish this one. I got to the point where, like, he gets himself off without Lolita noticing. While they're hanging out in the living room or something. And then I was like, okay, I'm done. Like, this is... I can't right now. This is not... There is a heaviness to this story that's super triggery, especially if you're a person who has dealt with abuse or people in your life have dealt with abuse, and it's very, like... It is very triggery for people like that. So you do have to go into it understanding that you're going to get triggered or just choose not to read it at all. Yeah. Like, those are your options. This is one of those books you don't necessarily read for enjoyment. You read to learn something.
And I don't think great art necessarily has to offend people, but definitely a lot of great art is great because it shows us truths about ourselves and our world that we don't want to face. And so it does upset and offend everyone.
Yes.
Because we don't want to admit it, we don't want to face it, we don't want to be there. And let's face it, there are fine lines between the people who we think of as normal in their behavior and the people who are doing things like this. There are lots of people that have thoughts that, you know, when you come across something like this, you look at your own actions and your own thoughts and say, gee, I kind of thought this one time. It's not that much different. You know, there is, in particular, I have known a number of women of your generation just because I don't know any of my generation doesn't mean it didn't happen, but
Mhm.
I've known a number of women of your generation who were underage and they married men who were in their mid to late 20s, early 30s,
Mhm.
and they were only like 14.
Yeah.
They married these guys, they had children. In every case, they're divorced now.
Yeah.
And I kind of think the reason they're divorced is these guys, when the women start becoming mature, they can't deal with it. They go off and look for somebody younger again.
Yeah.
And it's just unfortunate
It
that
is.
the girls were sucked in by this.
Mhm. They thought they were actually being loved when they were being fetishized.
Well, and they probably thought it was so cool to have this old, mature guy.
Yeah. They probably felt really good because a
Fixated
lot
on
of the
them.
things that are said to you is, oh, you're so mature for your age.
Yeah.
That feels good to hear when you're a young person.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things too, like, I don't know, like, I remember being 12 and thinking it's so, like, when we were 12 and starting to notice boys, we girls thought nothing of thinking, oh, we could probably bag a high schooler or a college guy. We're 12!
Yeah.
But, like, we're conditioned to some degree in our society to think that that's something you should do. You should go for an older man who's stable and looks good and all these things. And it's like, but there's no... We're just kids. Like, there's nothing we can do about it unless our parents are like, okay, yeah, go ahead.
But what they never think about is if a guy that's 25 or 30 will date a 12-year-old, if you marry him and you have children and your children are girls, what's going to happen?
Exactly.
That actually, I know of a
Highly
situation where that
suspicious.
did happen.
Mm-hmm.
Their daughters were babies and this guy was feeling them up.
That's
And
disgusting.
so she had to get away from him.
Yeah.
And for years, those two girls had all kinds of nightmares.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because they've been traumatized and
Mhm.
abused. And I think, too, like, there's a lot of things, too, in our contemporary culture right now. Like, the beauty standards. Every female beauty standard right now is what a prepubescent girl looks like.
Yeah.
No body hair, well trimmed. Like, heroin chic is back now. That was from the 90s where you were thin and scraggly, didn't have a lot of body hair, kind of had smaller boobs, that kind of stuff. Like, that is what the industry is showing regularly for modeling.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, you're trying to make these grown women look like children because that's beauty. Youth is beautiful. And it's like, not that young, though. Seriously, this is gross.
And I think that's part of why Nabokov did this the way he did, was to point out that hypocrisy in our society.
Absolutely.
That we do have this media culture that fosters and plays to pedophilia.
It does, yeah. And it still does today. I think that's what's so weird is then and now is no different.
Exactly.
It hasn't changed for several decades now.
No.
When does it get to change? Yeah.
I don't know. It can only change with each one of us changing ourselves.
Exactly.
And changing and so you have to read books like this and see what it's all about and make it cause you to be more introspective and think about your own self, your own attitudes, your own behavior, so that you can change yourself and hopefully part of the world changes.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Yeah, it is a slow process because this is so ingrained in our society. We need a majority to fight it, and unfortunately there isn't a majority.
Well, especially when there are still cultures around the world that
Child marriage is still a thing.
Yeah, maintain the culture that we had in European culture of that, you know, when a girl...
Yeah, when she starts menstruating, she's a woman and you can marry her off, yeah.
You arrange a marriage and get rid of her.
Yep. She can go have babies now.
Yeah. You know, that has changed. But there's still a lot of other parts of the world where that has not changed, and it's still okay.
Yeah.
Asia, for one.
Yeah, there are a lot of cultures still that do that.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So this is an important book.
This
is an amazing book. This is an extremely well-written book.
Yes.
Well-crafted
It's great
book.
literature, terrible subject matter. That's what I kept saying to Joe when I was my husband when I was reading it. Is like, it's really well written. Like, it's so well done. Like, but the subject matter is super triggery for me, and I just can't get through it anymore.
Yep.
So I definitely forewarn people, like, you read this to learn something, you don't read it to enjoy it. It is super triggery, so if you have been a subject to abuses, sexual or otherwise.
If you can read it with the right sort of mind, like, I don't get emotionally involved in books that I read. Like, if I read a story that's a tragedy, I'm not crying in the last pages. I just don't get that deeply emotionally connected to it. So it doesn't bother me as much.
Yeah. I'm thinking more to people who have experienced or know someone personally who has been very harmed and traumatized. This is going to be triggery no matter what. Yeah. Like, if you have any empathy whatsoever for those kinds of situations, this is just going to be a really hard read, and it's going to be triggery, and you're just... So trigger warnings all over the place. But that doesn't make it any less of an important work, which is why, again, like, now I'm not in the good headspace to finish it, but I do eventually want to reread it and try again when I'm in a better place, because I think it is such an important work that we do need to face these things as a society. And we have to sometimes face our own trauma in society to realize that this is a mindset that is typical. Like, a person wrote this because it's happening.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, you can write a fiction and have it not be happening, but a lot of it is very real human emotion.
And at the time it was originally published, it was happening, but nobody talked about it.
Yes.
Back then, you didn't talk about it. I mean, you didn't even get divorced and talk about it.
Yeah.
It was, things
you
like
just
that
mysteriously had different lives separate from each other, or like estranged.
It was not to be discussed. It was to be pushed under the carpet and
shove it under the rug. Yep.
And so it perpetuated.
Even
a lot of abuse perpetuated because our society would not talk about it.
Yeah, it wouldn't come into the light, so people just thought everything was fine. And if you did talk about it, you were hysterical. Like, oh, are you sure? Or, they sit there and question you just to be like, are you sure this really is happening to you?
Or what did you do to cause it?
Yeah, what were you wearing? That kind of stuff. Like, because, like, in my family, I remember a certain family member when they were younger, who's now, older than me, much older than me, ended up having a guy pick her up off of an ice rink and try to drag her away. And she thankfully still had her ice skates on and kicked the guy.
Ooh, ouch.
And was able to get him to drop her. But this is a child who is bundled up in a freaking coat to the, because it's 30 or less in Wisconsin. It's a brutal winter. But her mother was embarrassed when it was reported. Her mom was embarrassed that it was being reported at all, because nothing happened. Everything was fine. She got away. But she was embarrassed because it had to be reported that someone tried to kidnap her own child. That is how badly society has dealt with these kinds of situations. Like, that is a real life happened in my family thing.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's still like that. It's still so taboo that people are, like, afraid to, like, go and, like, report their assaults or their sexual abuses, especially as children, because as kids, like, oh, you're just attention seeking. It's like, yeah, I'm attention seeking because I need to draw your attention to the fact and seek help.
Yeah. And
you need to take me seriously. So, yeah, I think, though, culture is just so all over the place about it. There's no easy solution.
No, especially not, even if you face the fact that it's happening, what do you do about it?
Yeah. And
what does a kid do about it? A mother who knows her kids are being assaulted, what does she do about it?
Yeah.
Well, you got to get divorced and bring charges and all, but then
it is a lot, and it's a lot of money to hire a lawyer.
Life.
Yeah, it does. And a lot of that
just brings more focus on trauma that the kids are having, so they're just going to be more traumatized.
And it is costly. So if you're impoverished, you can't even get the resources you need.
No.
And it's in those communities, it's in impoverished communities where this is happening most frequently.
Oh, yeah.
So it's just becoming a snowball effect of problems, statistically speaking. But it is real life stuff. Like, if you don't have access to wealth because you have to pay for the divorce. Like, sometimes being able to pay for the divorce is enough for people and just kind of go somewhere else and start over.
Yeah.
But, like, if you want to really address the issue, you got to pay for the divorce, press the charges, pay for therapy, trauma therapy for your children, you know, and try to work through this as a family. And then the process of moving on top of that, it is a huge cost.
Yeah.
Just to address the problem as well.
Even the church wouldn't address this problem.
Exactly.
They tried to sweep it under the carpet and make it go away.
Yep.
Instead of getting people help and doing what should have been done, what morally should have been done.
Yes. Or they say, especially in instances where adult females are the subject of it, you just need to forgive him and try to heal your marriage. What?
No.
Especially, like, or if it's like, if they hurt your children, how do you just forgive him and try to heal your marriage? No, like, throw his ass in jail and let him sit there and think about it. Yeah. Just let him sit there. I know, right? Like, just let him sit there and think about what he's done in jail or whatever. You know, we are just so under-resourced, and it is so taboo and misunderstood and not talked about that no one knows what to do in these scenarios.
No.
But pointing it out definitely brings up the conversation, because conversations are what's needed to bring us to a solution. And if nobody's talking about it, then there's no solution.
And the guys that act this way, they obviously have a problem.
Yes.
They need help.
Yes, they do. They need help. And they need to be...
They do need to be understood. They do need to be sympathized with. They do need to get help. And they do need to be kept away from your playgrounds.
Yeah. And I think, too, it's normal, too, to just say, if a person can't be rehabilitated, then they need to be removed from society.
Yeah.
Because some people can get help and be rehabilitated, but we also have to admit that some people are just so sick and twisted they can't be helped.
I have heard something like this is like alcoholism, that you never can cure it. They just can control their impulses.
Yes. It really is about making sure that people have self-control and have resources to be helped.
Yeah.
But I also don't want to sympathize with people who are complete monsters, who don't want help and just play the parts and then manipulate and feed off people and end up hurting more children.
I don't know that we have a whole lot more to say,
I
though.
do have a few more things to say.
Okay.
Mostly about how passionate people are about things that happen to children. Because we can sit here and say, oh, pedophiles need help. And yes, some do. Some can be rehabilitated into society. Some can't.
Okay.
But there is a very strong feeling, especially from parents and mothers and things like that, that if they are a pedophile and even have those feelings, that they should all just be murdered. Like, straight up just execution. Like, there are people who are that passionate about it. And I understand the fine line. I'm not a person who has children at all, but I am a person who has been subjected to certain emotional and abuses and things through my childhood and conditioning. I understand the conditioning I've had based off of beauty constructs and things that have happened in my past that has made this book triggery for me. But one of the things that I also want to say is we need to stop acting like people aren't people.
Yeah.
We need to stop acting like that. Oh, they shouldn't have any feelings at all whatsoever about children.
True.
It's like,
True.
It is so ingrained in our society, even from ancient cultures. Like, our obsession with Greek culture kind of cultivates into who we are now, because Western society is so formed by these other societies where all this stuff was normal. Like, there was nothing wrong only like less than 100 years ago about marrying your cousin. Like, now we think that's gross or weird or bad for genetics or for whatever reason. But not much sooner than that, it was totally normal to marry a 14-year-old or a younger person.
Yeah, well, you have to remember there were societies in the long past that thought cannibalism was a perfectly fine.
Exactly. So these are all societal constructs that we have to understand. Like, just because you have a societal construct doesn't mean that you eliminate... You don't eliminate the problem.
Yeah.
Because these are so ingrained in us from hundreds of years of conditioning. You don't just get to cut that out of society. It's still going to be there. It's just going to be more hush-hush, unfortunately. And literature like Lolita definitely brings it up, saying, yeah, this is a part of our society. It is deeply ingrained.
Yeah.
And just because you have a passion for protecting children, great. That is fantastic. We should be protecting children. But we are often caught between wanting to protect the innocence of children and simultaneously shaming them for it, for being innocent and naive. And we need to stop acting like that. I think one of the best things that ever, like, helped me is that my parents had a lot of, like, children's books and literature talking about what to do when someone makes you uncomfortable as a child, who is an adult, who should have some kind of authority, and how to address it to adults. And, you know, making a safe space where mom and dad will make sure that you feel safe and protected. You know, and I think those conversations as a young person, yes, they were scary, but my parents weren't ignorant either.
Yeah.
So they were like, we understand that you are young, but if so-and-so up the street touches you inappropriate, like if a pedophile moves in down the street, you have to kind of have the sex talk before you have the conversation about what a pedophile is. In order for a child not to be afraid of having those conversations.
Well, I think that's where we go wrong as a society, is we don't have those conversations.
Exactly.
We don't teach our children those things.
Yes. So we're caught.
We're too embarrassed about talking about sex that we let them learn it from the street.
Yes. And that is the unfortunate, I think, the root cause of a lot of this is the sexual oppression that we give people and the fear of sexuality that we give young children in a lot of respects. And just not even talking about it.
Yeah.
So I definitely think that part of the issue isn't just necessarily, yes, adult humans need to be responsible for their actions and they need to control themselves. But we also can't leave the other half of this conversation ignorant to what can happen to them. I think, yes, there's probably an age where it's more appropriate to talk about it, where they have more cognitive understanding. But there are little ways that we can do it as they grow too, by teaching them something as simple as no. Teaching them that no is a magic word. And if they don't want to hug someone or kiss on someone or anything, they have the bodily autonomy to say no at a young age. That is a very simple thing that people can teach their kids to help protect them from things like this without having to have a sex talk or conversation at an extremely young age.
Yeah.
But I definitely think teaching those things in increments and over time is part of the solution. Not to, like, put responsibility back on the victims, but let's put responsibility on the parents for educating just as much as anybody else.
Well, and I don't know, but I think that if all children were raised with an understanding about all the things regarding sex, that things like pedophilia would probably have a much lesser chance of developing in our society. You'd see a greatly reduced incidence of that. You'd see a greatly reduced incidence of any kind of pornography, which would pull the rug out from under child trafficking. And I mean, just all kinds of problems would disappear by the simple element of all children having a correct talk about what sex is really about and how best to deal with it, how best to handle the feelings that they will develop.
Yeah. And it's okay, I think, too, to talk to kids about concepts before details. Like, you could tell a 5-year-old, oh, babies are made by having sex and it's a biological thing. You could be very general about it and talk about it scientifically without it being weird.
Yeah.
And then you get into details and emotions and things like that as they mature. You start noticing that they're noticing girls and boys. Like, I think that should be very normalized. But and I'm only coming from this because my parents were really good about talking to us about sex as kids.
Yeah.
And so that was a conversation that was never off the table. My parents were always very open when we had questions about stuff or heard anything at school. They were always open about making sure we knew what to do to protect ourselves if mom and dad couldn't be there. Because especially when we got to the age where we were involved in after school activities and things, and mom and dad aren't always there to be safe people for you. So learning to, like, how to identify a safe person and, like, how to, like, it's okay to just run, and it's okay to express that this is making me uncomfortable and I need to walk away from this, and things like that. My parents were always really good about that. And I think that's probably saved me from a lot of really bad situations that could have gotten even worse. But it also is one of those things that none of my friends got. None of my friends got that. And so they're all very ignorant. And then I end up playing parent for them in a lot of regards. Because they're sitting there talking about this. I'm like, that's abusive behavior, though. You know? Because my parents were very open about it. Or like, that's weird. You should talk to an adult about that. Or like, that's not normal. Stuff like that. And it's because my parents took the time from a very young age onward to make sure that I knew stuff when it was appropriate. Or when I started noticing things and they started realizing my cognitive abilities to develop, which is the benefit of being raised by an educator. My mom is an educator. So she was really good about that. My dad was always very open about stuff. Like, everybody was just really cool about it. So we never were afraid to ask our parents. Even, like, in marriage, I can still go to my parents and ask them questions about things that I'm experiencing.
Yeah.
And sometimes we don't have a solution to problems, or we don't have, like, a good idea because everything is subjective. But we are not afraid to dialogue about it and say, try this, do this. And I think that is a huge part of why society is having such an issue with, oh, we just need to eliminate the pedophiles. I'm like, no, we need to educate all parties involved, and maybe this will alleviate the issue altogether. I don't think it'll fix it all, but it'll at least alleviate it. And we need to stop acting like keeping people in the dark who might be very much subjected to this is the safest way to keep them safe. It's not. They don't know what's happening to them.
They're going to develop something, and you don't know what that'll be.
Yeah, and if your kids don't know how to express what happened to them, because they don't have the language or the terms, because you haven't talked about it, then how are you supposed to correctly identify who isn't a pedophile?
Yeah.
You know? Like, it's a very dark place to be. So I definitely think that society kind of being caught between wanting to protect innocence and wanting to shame them for it at the same time is a huge part of the problem. But yeah, that's all I have to say about that.
Okay. And I think we've gone on quite long about that.
Yeah.
And
so much to unpack in this book.
We should wrap it up. Tell us what you think. Have you read Lolita? Do you have thoughts about this subject? Yeah. Leave your comments on the video and
please be respectful and understanding that humans are humans, and not everybody is going into this conversation equipped well. Yeah. Including us. Have grace for one another. We can understand it's a really hot topic. So, and we empathize with a lot of perspectives. At least I do.
Lolita is definitely a top tale. It is a unique book.
Yes.
That there's really nothing else like it.
No, there really isn't. Unless you're a 300-year-old elf who is now marrying a 19-year-old girl.
What?
How is it different?
What are you talking about?
Okay, so think about it. In fiction, 300-year-old elf marrying a 19-year-old girl.
Where's there fiction about that?
Plenty of them. Isn't Sarah J. Maas? He's like 200 years. Tamlin's like 200 years old.
Oh, stuff like that. Yeah. Or Twilight.
Is it different? Straight to jail. No. Anyway. I'm making a bad joke. Uncomfortable conversations being led up with uncomfortable humor.
No, I was clueless. I thought you were referring to a specific book. I'm trying to think, what the hell book is this that she's talking about?
I kind of was, but that was the best example I could think of. There's plenty of those. Anyway. All right, guys. Thanks for joining us. Again, be respectful. Heartsies. And we'll see you guys next time.